I'm Kevin Good, and we're back to conclude our comparison between the Canon 5D Mark III and the Nikon D800. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, since the lackluster results from the Nikon last week, I have switched to shooting Canon. But I promise I won't let that bias my results in any way. Now, professional image manipulators know that some files hold up to a beating better than others. High dynamic range, high bit depth, and low enough noise to make use of all of it allow for stunning manipulations in post. But the data has to be there. If you've got the bits, an image can become this from this raw file, or turn to this from this, or this from this. The scientifically minded folks over at DxOMark have given their top score to the D800, but how does that measured disparity translate to a photographic advantage? To find out, we shot a puppy that is torn between Canon in the light and Nikon in the dark. The cameras were side by side with matched settings at 100 ISO. But to find out what is really in these raw files, I'm going to stretch the contrast, first on the highlight side. And here it is with the contrast extended. This is the same photograph, just with some Photoshop tweaks to bring out the barely visible text. Here's the original again, and here it is with the nearly invisible highlight details stretched out. I had a hard time matching the colors, so just pay attention to the noise, and you'll see they look pretty well matched. Back to the unprocessed again, and now let's look at the dark side. And again, I'll stretch the contrast out to see the shadow detail. Okay, you probably saw that joke coming. Both cameras handle it amazingly well, but the Nikon is hanging on a bit better with less color noise and less of the vertical banding that the Canon exhibits. To really push this even farther, I'm going to look into the deepest shadows in the image and stretch them out. This is where we can see that the Nikon really does an amazing job at low ISOs of capturing clean shadow detail, and it has a more organic noise pattern as opposed to the visible vertical pattern in the Canon. Keep in mind that this is with no noise reduction on either camera, so in the real world I could get both cameras to do even better.
Next up is a stills ISO comparison. My idea was to do a boudoir shoot and use the incredibly low light levels of natural candlelight to see how these cameras could fare under those circumstances. Unfortunately, my strippers from last week, Portia and Brutus, aren't returning my calls because my check bounced. So I had to ask around my friends to see who might be able to do it. Thankfully, one of my favorite actors is willing to do it for us, Robot.
I've been getting typecast lately, and I'm looking for more variety in my modeling book. Something a bit more sensual and organic.
This should work out perfectly.
I just assisted with our lighting setup on this one, while the incomparable Beth Shaw handled the photographic duties, trying to get the best out of Robot.
Can you look towards me?
What expression?
Bedroom eyes? Good.
The camera side key light is strictly candlelight, and we're combining it with some gelled flash from outside. With the camera at 3200 ISO, this is what we got. Hell yes. But if we look closer and view the unprocessed RAW with no noise reduction, we see that both cameras are fairly noisy zoomed in. So you probably wouldn't want to make a massive print shooting at this ISO without working some noise reduction, but the cameras are acceptably clean for many uses. However, if we look at an area with some fine detail, like the mesh on Robot's mouth, we see that the Nikon really manages to retain some of that finer detail, even at these higher ISOs. So let's crank it up some more.
Angle your head a bit and then look towards the flame.
I think that's my good side.
Perfect. Sexy Robot.
Now we really push the ISO up to 12,000.
That's kind of awesome.
Which is farther than I'd be comfortable with any camera, quite frankly. And hello you, Robot. Ugh. For one, it's shocking how good a Robot can look in a sailor cap. But secondly, this is an untouched RAW file with no noise reduction. I think it's safe to say that for web resolution, you could shoot at 12,000 ISO with either of these cameras. That's insane. But how do they hold up for larger prints? This is a closer look at the unprocessed RAW, and we see that they both have very similar noise level, but the Nikon has a finer pattern noise and is holding on to detail better, such as the texture on the front of the hat. This is phenomenal for 12,000 ISO. Beautiful stuff, you guys. Beth, I'm gonna need a print of this to hang over my bed.
That wraps up the tests we conducted on the cameras, but there's still a lot of other variables to consider. I wanted to do a final tally of the cameras to see which one wins, but I figured that as a Canon shooter, it wouldn't be fair. So I've invited a Nikon user, myself, from a couple weeks ago, to give a more balanced discussion. Hi, Kevin. Hi, Kevin. Look at you all young and spry. Okay, first off, resolution. Nikon takes that one, but not by much. All you're doing is filling hard drives for nothing. Hard drives are cheap. Next, ISO. Nikon squeaking through with the upset. Imperceptible imagined upset. They're even on stills ISO. Raw image quality. Nikon takes it again. All barely measurable wins, but what about frames per second? That's right, Canon, bitch. Pop-up flash. Nobody uses a pop-up flash, and Canon has better weather sealing because of it. I'm sorry, I called you bitch. Live view, Canon gets the edge, but the Nikon has a contrastier optical viewfinder that we prefer. Autofocus, we didn't really test that, and passing judgment on specs alone isn't cool. Jinx. Look at you. God, you're in such better shape. Price, Nikon, big time. Sync speed, they both suck. We'll get into that in more detail another time. Weight, Canon's a bit lighter. Exposure bracketing, Canon's a bit more flexible. Quiet shutter, Canon, again, way better. Nikon has built-in time-lapse features. God, you've hardly got any gray hair. Everything just kind of hurts now. Okay, so I think Nikon takes the edge in the stills department. It really is the best all-around stills camera I've ever shot, but they're both excellent cameras. Yeah, I guess so. Video? Okay, for resolution, Nikon has a tiny edge, but not enough to care. It's mostly aliased detail. Rolling shutter, Nikon is certainly better by a slim margin. Moire? The whole world is ahead of you. Okay, great. Canon really wins, seeming to have taken care of Moire nearly entirely. ISO. You're just so full of life and vigor. Okay, Canon really smashed Nikon here, despite Nikon doing well in the stills. So I guess Canon takes it for video, eh, Kev? Go get it, man. I love you. Is this inevitable, or is there something I can do now not to fuck me? Not to fucking become this fucker in the fucking future. Fuck. How does time travel work? So last week we came under a lot of flack for destroying a perfectly good camera instead of using it for a more positive purpose, like giving it to an underprivileged child. So this week I've hired this underprivileged child to help me out by shoveling money into this fire.
Can I use some of this money for food?
We're not actually paying him. That would be against child labor laws. So over here we have the Nikon D800 on the tripod, almost ready to go. And what we're trying to see is how these cameras reject non-visible light. Because if the camera can record light that's outside the visible spectrum, what you get are sort of wacky color casts in your image that you don't really want. So with me to help again is photographer extraordinaire John Pellet. John, how are you going to set this camera up to record this test?
Well, the setup's pretty simple, Kevin.
It's burning.